The stigma of heroin abuse, not just for the users, but for their families. We focus on the families of heroin addicts next on Carpe Diem. Welcome to Carpe Diem from Montclair State University's School of Communication and Media. I'm Mark Effron. I'm a professor here of journalism and television and digital media. We're all too familiar with the heroin scourge and the rising death toll here in New Jersey. But the stigma that's attached to heroin is an issue that is often overlooked. We hope to shed some light on it during this next half hour. We're joined now by Alicia Cook, a writer and activist. After losing her cousin to a drug overdose in 2006, Alicia began writing about the experience in order to help others going through similar situations to feel less alone. Her blog, The Other Side of Addiction, examines not only the users, but the families. Welcome, Alicia.
Hi.
So tell us about your cousin. Were you guys close?
Yes, Jessica and I were very close. We were born 10 months apart. Our fathers are brothers, and I have a small family, so we're all very tight-knit. That's us. But I miss her. It's whether you're close to someone or not, at the end of the day, she was also a family member of mine, but we happen to be really good friends as well. And when she started on her trajectory of becoming addicted to heroin, it really was a huge blow to our family. And she died 10 years ago, and now instead of being 10 months apart, we're 10 years apart. And I should have a 30-year-old cousin, and I don't. She passed away when she was 19.
What was she like before she became addicted to heroin? What kind of person do you remember her being?
She was loud, had a very contagious, loud laugh. She had a better sense of humor than I. She had great comedic timing, even for being young. She was sarcastic, but not in a hurtful way. She was very much into athletics and very social. She had so many friends. She was involved in everything and very close to her family and her sister and her brother.
Now, how did you know when she started using heroin? Did she tell you, or could you see it? All of a sudden, she became less loud? Or, I mean, what were the signs, and how did you know things were starting to change and not for the better?
My family, my uncle, they got an anonymous phone call from a concerned friend at the time when my cousin was about 17. And they said, Jess is using drugs and it's heroin. And we couldn't believe it. Obviously, we had not seen it. We didn't know. To answer your question, no, we did not see a change in her appearance until after we discovered she was actually using drugs. We didn't see a change in her personality. She had a 10 o'clock curfew, and she was still making it home at 10 o'clock every single day, up until she signed herself out of high school 2 months shy of graduation. When she turned 18, she had perfect attendance her junior year and near perfect GPA. I think it was over a 3.5.
Now, at that time, when you got the anonymous call, you couldn't believe it, then you start to see it. Was there stigma associated with it? Did you feel like, as a family, where did we go wrong? Or
I was young when this happened. I was more of her peer than someone put into a parental
position
role.
Of authority,
yes.
Right.
Now, of course, it would be a little different, but to speak for my uncle, who speaks about this all the time, there was a stigma, especially 10 years ago. There was much more of a stigma attached to heroin. It was more of a subculture still. It wasn't mainstream. It wasn't really on the news. So yes, we experienced stigma. I honestly, at the time, 19 years old and naive, I didn't want to tell my friends this was happening to my family at the time. But my uncle and aunt, I have to say, they jumped into action. The minute they got the call, they had Jess at 17 years old, still a minor. They had her in, drug tested her. The drug test came back clean. And we found out it wasn't because she was clean. A friend of hers was urinating for her. And that friend cost my aunt and uncle 6 months of my cousin's life at a pivotal time when she was still a minor, and they could have been more hands-on in her recovery.
You know, when you talked about the stigma 10 years ago, this may be kind of counterintuitive, but it's almost as if, you know, was it better when there was stigma? I mean, part of the reason why there isn't any stigma now is because it's so widespread, you know, in states like New Jersey, you know, the opioid crisis. In a way, it's almost too acceptable now because so many of my students tell me that they have high school friends who died. So, you know, I'm wondering if it's almost become, we've gone the other way where it's too accepted now that people die of heroin, you know.
I don't know if it's more accepted. I think it's less of a surprise now.
Okay.
It's just as heartbreaking to anyone close to someone losing someone to heroin. It's always so terrible. But I think it's less surprising than acceptable. I think that what rose out of this epidemic, which I also like to call a plague at this point, is there's more advocates. There wasn't nearly as many resources, online or physical, when my cousin was going through this at all. There wasn't as many medical treatment, and there wasn't as many rehab beds, especially in the state of New Jersey. So this unfortunate situation our nation finds ourselves in has created this whole new wave of advocates that really believe that addiction is a disease and we need to combat it by any means possible.
Bring it out in the open.
Yes.
and not.
You need to speak about it, because not speaking about it for the last 20 years, look where it got us.
So after your cousin passed, how long a period was it before you went from grieving and mourning to trying to figure out, what was the process of figuring out what your response would be? How did we get from, you know, you're mourning your cousin, and now what happens?
Well, underlying of all this is I've always known I wanted to be a writer.
Okay.
That's something that Jess knew. And in our last conversation, she, right before she went to rehab for the last time, she told me, if I don't make it out of this, I want you to write about it. And it was, at 19 years old, I felt like that was so powerful for her to say, because she was just very self-aware at that time that she was in trouble. And she went on to rehab, and she had 6 weeks clean before she left rehab and subsequently overdosed. So she had always said that to me, and it was always in the back of my head, but I did have to grieve, and I did have to educate myself on the disease of addiction, and specifically heroin, because I didn't want to go in and not be speaking, you know.
Knowing what you were talking about.
Exactly. So I took time. I was also in college. I was a junior in college when she passed away. So I went on, I earned my degree in English and journalism and got my first job. And then about 2 or 3 years later, I started writing about my experience in private. And I wasn't putting it anywhere.
This was just for yourself.
Yeah, and almost like outlining it, seeing what my angle would be. And it kept going back to, heroin's the worst thing that ever happened to me, and I've never even touched it. I've never used it, and it's still the worst thing that ever happened to me. So it kept going back to that. So I spoke to my mother and my aunt and uncle, and I said, I'm going to start writing about it.
Yeah, I have one of the lines, I am not an addict, Alicia wrote, but try and love one. And then see if you can look me square in the eyes and tell me that you didn't get addicted by trying to fix them. If you're lucky, they recover. If you're really lucky, you'll recover too.
Yeah. Yeah, that was my first piece that ever went viral, actually. It took off because so many families sadly related to what I was saying. I was getting countless emails after that went out. Thank you for putting into words what I couldn't. And it's so important for families to realize that, unfortunately, if your loved one does not recover, you still need to. You still need to wake up every day and raise your other kids, or go to work, or go on and get married and have this life still. So I always talk about the treatment options for families, for grieving families going through it, because this will wreck you. This will wreck your family. This will wreck you mentally. It'll keep you up at night, and you need to self-care and worry about yourself as well.
So tell us how that writing led to The Other Side of Addiction, your blog, and you still post for it, right?
Yes, twice a month still.
We're going to look at a picture of that in a second.
Yes, there it is. Oh, there's my Twitter on the side.
There's your Twitter on the side.
That's my poetry book that's in Barnes & Nobles now.
So tell us about the blog and The Other Side of Addiction and how it started and where it is now.
Okay, so where it started was with that article where you just read the excerpts. I put it online. I knew this editor that used to work for the Asbury Park Press in New Jersey, and she moved to New Orleans, but she still was working within that field. So I just pitched it to her, and she published it, and it went viral. So after, like I said, the response I got from that article, I posted one more from my point of view, and it did just as well, if not better. And I started getting these emails every day, and to this day, I still get about 100 emails a day from families, people affected.
100 emails a day?
75 to 100 a day. My Gmail is like at max capacity at this point.
And what do they say? I mean, are there some through lines through that 75 to 100 that are common themes that you can tell us about?
Yes. It's always, majority of the time, it's a grieving parent or spouse whose child or significant other passed away from addiction. So, mostly heroin addiction, but I get emails from those who battle alcohol, crack, meth, and or just pain pills, and they're not moving on to heroin yet. But The Other Side of Addiction started because of those emails from families. They said, "Thank you for putting into words what I couldn't. I wish I could tell my story." So I said, well, why can't I tell your story for you? And instead of just speaking from my point of view, I started interviewing families. I created an interview form, and I put it up, and I put a call out, and I said, if you want me to tell your story and publish it to help other families, fill out this form. And that was in October of 2015, and within 2 months I was booked until June of this year.
Wow.
On my editorial calendar.
So now, if you get these 75 to 100 emails a day, you can't answer all of them, can you?
I do.
You do?
I do. I used to be, in the beginning, it was 10 to 15 emails a day, and I would respond immediately.
Yeah.
But now I dedicate a couple hours of my weekend to responding to families. I try to get to them within 72 hours because I know from experience how important and how necessary it is to connect to someone who's been there, because I felt alone for a very long time. So I want to be that person where I could say, I don't know exactly what you're going through because every story is different, but I could, I have that empathy.
Now, do you also connect them with, you talked about how many more programs there are now than there were when Jess went through her addiction. Do you have connections with social service agencies or heroin addiction programs?
Yes.
How does that work?
Especially in New Jersey.
So, but people write to you from all over, I would imagine.
Yeah, they do write for me from all over, but for anything in the tri-state area, I try to connect them to someone that, thanks to my writing, I've been able to connect to so many great people. And a lot of them work in the recovery and treatment fields. And just the other day, I recommended a woman reach out to Advanced Health in the Eatontown area because I know someone who appeared on my documentary with me. So I just try to help them in any way I can because I'm not a doctor and I'm not,
Right. So in my last question, as we wrap up, if you had to look at the camera and to tell people who are watching, who are going through this, what is the one thing you would tell them?
That recovery is possible for your loved one in active addiction and for yourself. Recovery is more than possible. You just have to be brave and make a phone call. It's just one phone call could change the entire trajectory of your life for the better if you just make that phone call.
Wow. Alicia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You really are inspiring how you're helping so many people.
I'm trying.
Well, you are. We turn now to the story of Nick Fagan and how his death led his family on a mission to help others.
And our ultimate goal is just to make a difference, to help people. When Nicholas was suffering, he had us, you know, he knew that he had us. And there's so many people that don't know where to turn and don't know what to do.
Right, we wanted to fill in a hole that was there when my nephew was having problems. I didn't know what to do. And, you know, we were searching. And I think that so many parents are in that situation, that they need somewhere to find, to get a resource. And so, like us and some other organizations that began, we kind of tried to fill that hole in our towns.
You know, we had been in and out of court with Nicholas for years. You know, it started, you know, before he was 18, and then after he was 18, and he got arrested one night. And so that just kind of started our whole thing. So anyway, so he had to go to his probation officer, and we had known he'd been acting differently. So he sent his urine out. And then when he went to go there one day for his IOP, they put him in jail because it did come back positive for opioids. And he came out, it was a rainy day, I picked him up on a Wednesday, and he was all, you know, I mean, he was 6'3", you know, strong, and, you know, he looked really good. So that was a Wednesday. And he passed away on Friday morning. He was the kind of person that could walk in a room and not know anybody, walk into a room of like, you know, 100, 200 people and just know everyone by the time he came out of there. He, you know, he was smart and funny, and I think when Ed and I were talking about it, we said, you know, this is not right. You know, you can't put someone in jail and then set them out on the street, you know, where they get their drugs. So I think that's what we decided, you know, that, you know, something like that has to change.
It's going to be a problem. Everyone's going to know somebody that's got some type of problem, addiction problem, and we cannot no longer hide it.
You know, there's so much stigma and everything associated with addiction that I think people were ashamed to talk about it. And so we just decided that we needed to be the ones to start talking about it and to be a place where people can come to us if they need help, if they need resources, if they don't know signs or symptoms of addiction or heroin use. If we can help someone, you know, get an airline ticket to somewhere into treatment, or if we can help someone find a meeting or, you know, a phone number that they need or get someone into treatment. That's really our goal. I think someone just needed to finally say something, you know, for people to realize that, you know, our kids are dying. I mean, it's, you know, you know, and it's not a moral failing. You know, they're not bad kids. They're kids that have a bad problem. You know, even Nicholas said that at one point, you know, I'm a heroin addict, Mom, what do you want? You know, like you know, no, you're not, you know, that doesn't define you. That's not who you are. You're, you know, he's a great kid with so much potential.
Thanks to Christina Fagan and Ed Fantuzzi for telling their story. We're joined now by Nicholas Beam, who helps patients navigate the system at RJW Barnabas Health, the state's largest health system. He works with people who are recovering from opioid overdoses. Welcome, Nicholas.
Thank you for having me.
So what's a patient navigator? I had this idea that you'd be wearing goggles and have a scarf on.
No, well, that's only on Wednesdays.
Okay.
My job, I'm based out of Newark Beth Israel Hospital and Jersey City Medical Center. We are the opioid overdose recovery program. So the program sends a recovery specialist to the bedside of the emergency room for any individuals brought into the emergency room administered Narcan. If that individual agrees to engage in some sort of treatment, it's my job to perform a clinical assessment and recommend the appropriate level of care based on the results of that assessment.
So when you say clinical assessment, what's your background? How did, you know, is this a course you took, a degree you got, or is there something more personal?
It's a little bit of both. I struggled with addiction myself for a period of 17 years. I found sobriety at the age of 30, went back to school. I'm now a certified alcohol and drug counselor and currently a student at Hudson County Community College, going for my associates in social work and then hopefully a bachelor's and a master's and so forth and so on.
So before we talk about your current work, talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about your addiction. How low did you go, and what was the point where you realized that you needed to do something radically different?
Well, to sum it up, I took my first drink at the age of 13, and I did my last bag of heroin at the age of 30. When I was 30 years old, I was lucky enough, I had a cousin who entered treatment at the Salvation Army in Jersey City, completed the program, was an employee of the program, reached out to my immediate family back home, and was able to get me enrolled in that program. It was a 6-month residential program. I completed the program, and while I was there, I couldn't tell you when or how, but at some point the bell went off, and I saw a way out. And I got myself back in school. I started working for the program. I did my internship there for a period of 2 years, and moved on from there and never looked back.
But was there a moment when you realized that you had to make a change in your life? But what was the moment where you said, now I want to help others? Was there one specific moment, or was it just more of a gradual thing, the internship, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a good question. I was trying to figure out my next move as I was nearing the end of the program. And one of the lieutenants that worked there, she said, Nick, have you ever thought about getting into the field? And I said, actually, yeah, I have. She said, you should look into some schooling options for it. So I started to just kind of look into it on the back end. I got the information on the classes and funding for the classes. And when I was employed there, I was driving a truck the first 2 months. And then the intake position opened up to do admissions for the program. The lieutenants and the major, they came, they offered it. They said, you want to take a shot? I said, sure. And I've been in the field ever since.
Now, how does your background infuse your work with patients? Because, you have the degree, you've gone through the training, you're certified. A lot of people who go through that don't have the background you had. So what does that background, how is that the secret sauce, if you will, in terms of dealing with patients?
Well, it's a card that I don't always pull out. Every case is so different. So a lot of times in a clinical role, my job is simply to assess and recommend the appropriate level of care. I do think that it is very helpful. I have that empathy for clients, being that it's something that I lived through, I experienced. Anytime we interact with anybody in the emergency room, I can empathize, I can identify. I've been there, I've done it. So, and I think when it comes from a place of genuine concern, I think people pick up on that. And I think a lot of clients, you'd be surprised how many clients ask me if I do drugs.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
They ask you if you do drugs now.
No, if
you had done drugs.
If I did,
So
yeah,
you said it's not a card you pull out all the time.
No.
Give me an example of when you do pull out that card. What would be the circumstance where you would then go back?
If a client directly asks me,
yeah,
I am honest about it. I don't hide it. It's a lot of counselors don't choose to self-disclose if they're in recovery, and that's every counselor's choice. Personally, myself, it's not something that I'm against, and I'm actually all for it. I have no problem disclosing my past. I've been clean almost 6 years now, and my life continues to improve on a daily basis, and it all starts with just not picking up a drink or a drug.
Once you do the assessment, how do you stay with that patient through the process?
Yes, we do.
So tell us about that.
So our recovery specialist is at the bedside within an hour of the phone call. We have a recovery support coordinator who runs all 5 counties. All of our recovery specialists are also in recovery, minimum of 4 years, working a program of recovery of their own. Once the client agrees to go to treatment, the recovery specialist does an 8-week follow-up with that client, a couple of calls a week just to check in, see how they're doing. If the client engages in treatment, it is my job to assure that we have all the proper releases of information signed so that we can follow up with that client. So then they have me staying in touch, their recovery specialist staying in touch, not to mention the amazing team of people we have working behind the scenes, scrambling to make sure that everything is going off without a hitch.
One of the things we've been talking about on this broadcast are the families. We just looked at the piece, A Change for Nick. Before that, we spoke to a woman who writes about, and because of what happened in her family to her cousin. Do you deal with families? And,
Sure.
and what are you seeing, and how has that changed, say, from when you were in recovery? Well, how is the scene in New Jersey in 2017?
I think, again, it's really case by case, but what I can say is that a lot of times I think the family members are the ones kind of getting lost in the shuffle. Family members can benefit from treatment just as much as the individual suffering from substance use disorder. There's a very fine line between helping and enabling. So it's very easy on my end to tell somebody, if your son or your daughter is doing this, you have to put these consequences in place if you want to have a chance to succeed. And it's very easy as an outsider to suggest that to somebody. But when you're dealing with your mother, your father, your daughter, your sister, your brother.
Yeah.
Of course, it's very, very different.
Yeah.
And families can use the support just as much as the individual
So
suffering.
what is the support that is available to the families of the patients that you handle?
There are self-help groups such as Al-Anon, Nar-Anon for family members with individual suffering with alcohol use disorder, substance use disorder. Robert Wood Johnson is actually working on a couple of things right now as well, kind of like an all-recovery meeting where anybody is welcome. You know, because some self-help group meetings are closed to, you know, the users only. So for family members to maybe come and get a different perspective, like what the individual goes through, then the individual can hear what the families go through, and to get it all out on the table and talk about it in a safe environment could be very beneficial.
But is it integrated? In other words, you're working mostly with the patient. You push family towards a way, but is there a certain amount of holistic focus on it's not just the patient, but it's his or her family?
Well, the thing with that is if you're working with a client, you have to have the client's permission to engage
with
their family due to privacy laws. So,
HIPAA, right?
Correct, sir. So a lot of times, some clients don't want that. Some clients are very reluctant to have anybody know what's going on. If the client does give us that consent and that authorization, then absolutely we can include the family in any and everything we do.
So final question, Nicholas. What do you think has to be done that isn't being done right now in New Jersey?
How long's your program?
About 30 seconds left.
No. You know, there are some very aggressive moves being taken right now to combat the opioid epidemic and substance use disorder as a whole. Of course, more beds, more treatment facilities, more resources for families, things like that you're talking about. All things that are being very aggressively pursued right now by the state of New Jersey.
Nicholas, thank you so much.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Nicholas, and thank you for joining us on this episode of Carpe Diem, where we heard powerful stories about how tragedy spurred family members to do more than grieve, but to help others pick themselves up. If you would like more information on today's broadcast or any of our other episodes, you can write to us at the email address you're looking at right now, carpediem@mail.montclair.edu, or call us at 973-655-5158. We'd love to talk to you. For all of us at Carpe Diem, I'm Mark Effron.
Still stay around.